at the functionality introduced by the Deposit Accounts module, and this is session 1 of 2. So this session will be an overview of the main characteristics and some of the configuration involved using the account type settings. The next session will cover off some things to be aware of when going through the opening process and on other processing related items in more depth. So deposits are investments by clients where funds are held by the finance company on deposit, earning interest and at an agreed interest rate between both parties. Alternatively, deposits can be treated more like investment funds, where the funds are invested on behalf of, and any return on those investments can be credited back to the deposit via an income distribution. The Deposit Accounts module takes care of all aspects of a deposit or investment, including calculating and charging interest, deducting withholding tax, and meeting various statutory requirements with taxation authorities. There are two types of deposit type in finPOWER Connect under the one deposit class of fixed and on-call. These can be customised further according to other requirements. The fixed term deposit, also known as a term investment, is a way to manage deposited funds for a specific time period. This usually comes with other conditions as part of the agreement between the investor and the finance company, such as loss of part of the interest value or a reduction in rate for early redemption or a fee to break the term deposit early. The benefit of locking a deposit in for a term is typically a higher return on investment for the investor, meaning in the most basic of terms a higher interest rate. The fixed term deposits also have the option to set rollovers or reinvestments automatically on maturity, which we'll cover in the account type settings today and see it in action in our next session. The on-call style deposit behaves in a similar way to what we'd consider a standard savings account at a bank. Funds are deposited and interest is earned as expected, and because there is no term or set maturity date, the investor can normally request to withdraw the funds at any time, in full or in part, depending on other conditions in their agreement with the finance company. The on-call deposits are also more typically at a lower interest rate, and that rate is usually variable, which can be managed a few ways within finPOWER Connect, one of those being rate tables. If the finance company has the model where they are investing funds on behalf of their investor, the investment income distribution facility available in finPOWER Connect allows interest to be allocated according to an average daily balance of the deposit, rather than paying out interest earned at a set rate, which we'll see an example of working in our next session. Also available if licensed for loans as well as deposits are pools, and pools are a way to link groups of deposits and loans and can be useful for a number of reasons, including reporting and as part of a custom scripted solution. It's important to note that you can link one deposit to multiple loans and even multiple deposits to multiple loans. However, each account can only belong to one pool. As you would expect with earned interest, there's also normally requirements by the various tax departments, depending on your country location, for reporting on things like resident and non-resident withholding tax and approved issuer levies and more. finPOWER Connect has several built-in functions to assist the finance company with their reporting, including the ability to generate tax certificates for the countries that need them. They're not currently required in New Zealand, as the information is now reported in a different way. And finally, there are several options available for the payment of the earned interest. For fixed term deposits, the investor can choose to receive the earned interest by direct credit at the agreed frequency, or choose to transfer it to another account within finPOWER Connect. For example, if the investor had both a fixed term deposit and an on-call deposit, they could opt to transfer the interest monthly when earned from the fixed term deposit to the on-call. There is also the option to compound the interest, increasing the principal value of the deposit balance, and also a capitalise option. This differs slightly to compound, as depending on the element configuration in the background, it can be used to reallocate the interest to other balances, such as fees, rather than principal only. The more common occurrence would probably to be add it to the principal balance, but however, this option is useful in case a situation arises for the finance company and investor which requires a different approach. Moving on to the account type settings. We thought we would show side by side the demo account type, showing some of the differences between on-call and fixed term. So as with the loan account types, which we covered in a previous session, the settings for the deposits are found in the admin library of the same name, so account types. And as you'll know from the previous sessions, the general page is also where you can set the code, description, product type, category, and icon for your account type. On our general page for the two deposit types, we can see they are the same. There's only one deposit account class, which differs from the loan classes model, which have 3 different classes that enforce some of their different features. With deposits, the main difference being that on-call deposits do not have a term. They don't really require a separate class. You'll also notice that the credit type is not available because they are investments and not debts. They are not reported on in the same way. So in other words, for things like comprehensive credit reporting, it's not required. On the new accounts page, as we've seen before, this allows the setting of default options available to a user in the new account wizard, including whether maturity instructions can be entered at the time of opening. This is one setting not really relevant to on-call deposits as there's no maturity. Also available, sorry, we have a noise distraction, 2 seconds. I know you guys can't hear it, but Casey's new computer's talking to her and it's hilarious. Anyway, where was I? Okay. Also available is the option to have the print deposit certificate ticked by default, which can be handy to ensure users aren't accidentally missing the option if it's a requirement that the document be produced during the opening process. Also here is the account warning information. And depending on the other configuration throughout finPOWER Connect, can be useful for alerting users if something is remiss before the deposit account is opened, such as issues with client identification, which could have an impact on the finance company if they're not meeting their anti-money laundering legislative requirements, which even with investments usually requires confirmation of an investor's identity, typically their address as well, and a declaration of the origin of funds. On the term page, this is where we can really start to see a difference between the two types. You'll see the very first setting on this page is where we determine if the account type is on-call or fixed. Once this setting is ticked, you'll notice the options for setting default terms, term limits, maturity instructions, reinvestment details, and repayment details options are no longer available, appearing grayed out. On the fixed term deposit example, we can see all options are available and applicable defaults and available options can be configured. The option to default a term works in the same way as with loans. It simply pre-populates the term field with what is set here in the account type settings. They can also opt to limit the terms to a list, meaning the user is restricted to selecting one of the options in the drop-down list rather than being able to enter a term in a free format. The term limits are fairly self-explanatory and are available to restrict the minimum and maximum terms available to the user when setting up the investment. The option to roll the maturity date forward, again, is fairly self-explanatory, but to clarify anyway, it means that if an investment was set to mature on a Saturday, for example, if a Saturday is set in finPOWER Connect as a non-business day in the calendar, the deposit would not mature until the next available business day. This setting allows the investor to continue to earn interest on the days where they cannot realistically access the money that was due to mature. The maturity instructions list contains available options and can be configured depending on the finance company's own requirements. For example, they may not wish to allow the option of to be advised, meaning the user and investor must choose an instruction. The maturity instructions can be changed on an account at a later date, provided the user has permission to do so. Reinvest options will close the account and open a new deposit based on the account type set in the reinvestment details section. So if you had a 6-month term deposit type as an example, you'd probably set it to default to reinvest automatically to another 6 month term deposit at maturity, which is what would appear in the new account wizard in the maturity instructions by default. The other available types can be restricted by adding them to the new types list below. Again, these options can also be changed at an individual account level. So if the investor called before maturity and stated they wanted to reinvest for a different term, that could be overridden by reinvesting to a separate account type of, say, 12 months deposit as an example. But this all depends on how the finance company's processes look and how the configuration is set up. I strongly suggest having a good test in this area, but we'll show this in motion in our next session as well. And finally, the repayment details section allows defaults to be set and availability for payout options. We can see check is ticked as available, but given the current state of checks being a bit of a dying breed, as it were, this would likely be unticked in a real-world scenario. The setting transfer deposit must include a common client is a good way to prevent users from accidentally picking up the wrong account to transfer to, as they'll only be able to select from options that have at least one of the investors on it. On the interest page, we can see it's all very similar to the loan types, with options to include startup interest, define default cycles, and what is available for the user to select from, and what interest options are available, such as rate tables, as well as, of course, a fixed rate. As you'll notice, the options are the same for both, as even though the on-call deposit doesn't have a maturity, a fixed rate can still be configured and used. On the interest options page, here we can also see the options are largely the same, with the exceptions being related specifically to terms. The option compound final interest payment, for example, is not available to the on-call deposit because it has no term. This option for the fixed term deposit holds the final interest payout if applicable and compounds it, increasing the deposit principal and then reverting to the maturity instructions once that date has been reached. The preserve payment type when reinvesting from another deposit is available to both and will bring across the investor's preferred payment details to the new account. So if they had chosen for the interest earned to be direct credited monthly to their bank account, this information would then be carried through to the new investment. You'll also see the option to roll the interest payout date forward if it falls on a non-banking day, for the same reasons as the maturity roll forward option mentioned earlier. The rate tables page is simply where the rate tables available to this account type can be selected. As we can see here, the example account types have different rate tables available to them. The DFT having a tiered rate approach based on investment value, and the DOC having the one rate but allowing future dated rate changes, which, as touched on earlier, is one way that a variable or floating rate for deposits can be managed. The rate tables themselves are configured and maintained in their own admin library, as covered in a previous session. On the close options page, this one speaks for itself and is the same for both, and is where the elusive allow closed accounts to be reopened setting lives, and this is a really good one to be aware of. We get quite a few support queries through saying, why can't I reopen an account? And I think I've mentioned it previously. It's always here. On the other page, you'll see again, they are the same, option availability wise. Here is where you can set whether or not to use statements and the default frequency, and a parameter set can be defined here to display custom fields on the user defined page on the deposit account itself, often used if additional information needs to be recorded or in conjunction with some scripted customizations. The ability to allow withdrawals and transfers is also here, along with a slightly newer setting opting to allow deposits to go into a negative balance, which for the most part I would imagine is better being left unticked. However, like everything, is determined by the needs of the finance company. You'll notice another common client transfer setting, and this setting will require any transfers from the accounts of this type to require a common client rather than just being isolated to the maturity transfer setting seen earlier. The promotions page has the same ability to add promotions as required as the loans, and there's a separate session already completed on this on our YouTube channel, but essentially allows the main characteristics of an account type to be overridden when the promotion is selected in the new account wizard to finding the promotion defaults instead. So we've just got a wee example one on the one there. On the transactions page, this is where the default transactions are set, as we've covered previously. We can see here in both example, only the one is set, being the opening investment transaction. If a finance company did have an opening account fee, as an example, this could also be added in here. So it's automatically added when you go through the new account wizard. On the documents page, this defines the document IDs for their corresponding events or descriptions, for example, like the statement event having the deposit statement linked. As with other areas involving documents throughout finPOWER Connect, there are sample documents available for many of these, such as deposit certificates, and the samples make good templates to build on for the finance company, but they must ensure the documents they have in use are fit for purpose and cover their legislative requirements. No finance company should rely on the samples alone, and it's their responsibility to seek advice and confirmation for the content of their documents that generate and supply to their investors. On the rules page, this tends to be used a little bit more probably for the loan types with the overdue letters, but we've put an example rule in here showing that this is a facility to trigger an automatic action based on an event. So this one here is set to set a specific document if the closure reason is early redemption. So if you close a deposit, use the method early redemption, it will generate the deposit maturity advice, but the client may have a specific document that they'd want to send for that event, and that's one way to facilitate that. On the accounting page, as is with the loans, the relevant elements are attached to their corresponding transaction event, and deposits have their own element types, which we'll be covering in more depth next week. As usual, everything in blue is mandatory and therefore must have an element set. The sample elements can be created by initializing the deposits module via the new company wizard in global settings if the client's new to the module. I believe it'll also create these two sample account types. So it's a good base to start with and then further customize from there. On the scripts page, this is where at an account type level, scripts can be defined to override or add additional functions to the core finPOWER Connect functionality within these events using the business layer. Excuse me. In other words, things like custom scripts for interest calculations if what the finance company is wanting is not available out of the box. On the user defined page, the parameter set for this page is actually configured in global settings, but allows the use of additional fields on the account types themselves, like this sample here showing an additional field for advanced limit, for example, which again is something that could be picked up on in custom scripted solutions. And finally, there's the audit page, which I don't have a picture of, but will show you audited records when certain changes are made to the account type record. And we've covered audit settings before, but they're found within global settings. So that's the account type settings, and we're nearly done for this session, but I just wanted to briefly show the account type form before we go, in particular the financial page, to show the difference between the two. So looking here, this is an on-call deposit, and we can see here they've got a pay type of compound. You can review the pay type at any stage and go in there and change it to whatever the investor is after. So here's where we will see our other available options from our account type. There's a section missing that only appears on fixed term deposits. You can probably guess what that will be, but it's our maturity instructions. So again, on the financial page here, you can review what the deposit automatically has, well, sorry, not automatically, but has configured, such as their initial investment details, the payment type for their interest, cycles, rates, and of course the maturity instructions. So currently this one is set to pay out all by direct credit once it matures on the 10th of December. So we've come to the end of our session for today. As always, if there's any additional information you seek, don't hesitate to contact application support for user interface queries or code support in relation to code-specific questions, as there's many scripting events available through the many processes involved with accounts that can be utilised for custom requirements. As